Let's go to Andrew Pendleton, Policy Director at the New Economics Foundation. Now, Andrew has written an extensive report on the surging costs of HS2. He joins me now. Andrew, thank you for your time. So this leaked report then suggesting HS2 could cost £106 billion, maybe more. Do you think that this is the end of the line for high-speed rail 2?
I mean, in the view of the New Economics Foundation, it should be, but not principally, to be honest, because of the cost, even though it's pretty eye-watering. It's more, what could you do with that money if you spent it on the rest of the rail network? And the answer is really quite a lot, and you could bring quite a lot of benefit to people who are travelling regular commutes day in, day out, rather than, you know, the kind of flashier services, which tend to serve kind of better off passengers as well, to be honest. So our view would be, don't necessarily think about this as being too much money to spend on the railways, but don't spend it on HS2.
And one of the problems with the railway network, of course, is a capacity issue. And HS2, whatever else it is, it strikes me as an expensive and not terribly efficient way to increase capacity.
Well, that's right. And of course, it didn't start life with that as its strategic aim.
Or even as a justification.
Exactly. And I mean, the problem is that actually most of the arguments that are now being used to support HS2 have been reverse engineered into the project.
Yeah.
But, you know, one of the biggest problems with it, even if you accept that it does some of that, which of course it will do some of that, is that one of the other big propositions now for it is that it's going to rebalance the economy north-south. But in fact, more of its benefits are going to flow to London than will to the northwest or the northeast or the Midlands. So actually, in fact, in our view, it does the very opposite of rebalancing. So even by that metric alone, it's not the best way to go. And in fact, if you're going to build a new railway network that serves the north, you should start in the north.
And yet some of the politicians in the north of England, Mayor of Greater Manchester, Labour's Andy Burnham, now he says it wouldn't be acceptable if the north of England part of HS2 was delayed or downgraded. He says that the development of an east-west rail route across the north, that would be known as the Northern Powerhouse Rail or HS3, that relies on HS2 being built. So what he wants to see in his area is something which relies on HS2 being built and not being downgraded.
Well, Northern Powerhouse Rail, if what that means is people being able to get from Liverpool via Manchester to Leeds and Hull and Newcastle, then, you know, it would be a very good thing. But there's no way that that's entirely reliant on building a fast line from London to Birmingham and Leeds and Manchester in the first place. So where I would completely agree with the Mayor of Manchester is that it's really important that the investment goes into the north. And so the suggestion that that bit now might not happen or might not be as good or as quick as the rest, I think is an insult actually to those travellers in the north of England that desperately need better infrastructure. But you really don't need the southern bit to make the northern bit good.
OK. And another mayor, Andy Street, West Midlands mayor, still expects this to go ahead. He has said this will drive the regeneration of our economies in Birmingham, Manchester, in Leeds and other cities in the Midlands and the North. He also says no government committed to levelling up around the country would possibly turn its back on that opportunity. So there is the West Midlands mayor who sees this entirely replete with positives for his area.
Well, that's not... I mean, the point is that's not what the data says. This comes from the government's own data set on HS2. The most recent appraisal, which was done by HS2 Limited for the Department for Transport in 2017, says that the 40% of the economic benefits will flow to London, 18% to the northwest, 10% to Yorkshire and Humberside, and 12% to the West Midlands. And that seems to us to be the opposite of regional rebalancing. More of the benefits going to London and the southeast than any other part of the country. So, you know, it's important that they look at the data, but I also think there's a sort of sad problem. There's a sad truth that underlies this, which is about this whole economic rebalancing thing in the UK, which is I understand that a lot of the Northern and Midlands leaders want this, but they want it because they see it as their only hope of bringing regeneration to parts of their towns and cities. Now, if you have to build a £100 billion railway line to build regeneration, we're getting something terribly wrong in this country. And in fact, the real key to this is rethinking the way we do infrastructure development and rethinking the way the parts of the country that benefit from that. Because, at the moment, London benefits to the tune of something like £4 to every £1 spent in other parts of the country, in the north in particular, and that's got to change.
The mood music, maybe I'm hearing it differently, I don't know, I wonder what you think. The mood music seems to be suggesting that Grant Shapps is lining us up for an announcement maybe around the budget to say that HS2 has been cancelled and it will not proceed. Is that your sense of where we are?
I don't know. There's a lot of the kind of, I suppose, usual powerful forces, captains of industry and so forth behind the HS2 project. I just wonder if it's now got so eye-wateringly expensive. I mean, actually, the 100 billion figure is not new. Quite a few people who are rail experts have been saying that it's going to be way more than the nearly 57 billion that was previously forecast. And maybe up to around 100 billion. So it's not really a new thought that's come out today, but seeing it from potentially coming out of this review that Doug Oakerby has been leading on behalf of the government is quite shocking. And you do begin to wonder whether a project that doesn't really fulfill the strategy, doesn't really do what it says on the can, it's a solution in search of a problem, rather. Is it really the right thing to do to spend £106 billion, which is what they've suggested it might cost today, on that project? The New Economics Foundation's point of view is that the rail network needs investment. We shouldn't be scared of putting that money in, but let's get it right and put it into the right places.
Is the fact that £8 billion has been spent already on this any kind of argument for proceeding? Because, of course, if we didn't, that would be money that would be lost forever.
No, because, there's a concept in economics called the sunk cost fallacy, which is that which is this fallacy, this idea that if you've already spent some money on something, you might as well spend whatever the rest of it is to deliver the whole thing. Now we know from our own the way we spend our own money that's not true. If you've got an old car and you keep having to spend more and more money on it, you know that just because you spent some money on it, that's a bad decision.
Well, you should see some of the cars that I've taxed in my life, but I take the point.
Well, me too, perhaps. But the point is that these are serious grown-up decisions. This is a lot of money. 8 billion to you and I sounds like an extraordinarily large amount of money, but I think all of us would understand that if to get the value out of that 8 billion, we've got to spend another 98.
Yeah.
I think,
and possibly more, than that,
and possibly more, because originally in 2011, even adjusting for inflation, this is bonkers. Originally in 2011, the amount that HS2 were forecast to cost was 33 billion, so it's trebled over the past, in less than a decade.
So if this is cancelled, though, and let's assume, again, as I did with Joe Rukin from the Stop HS2 campaign earlier on for the purpose of the conversation, let's assume this project does get cancelled, £8 billion has nonetheless been lost to this country. It has been wasted on absolutely nothing of value. Who is responsible for that?
Well, I mean, there's a whole series of decision makers who've been responsible for digging this hole deeper and deeper over time. So secretaries of state, beginning and working backwards with Chris Grayling and others in the Department for Transport. But, it's also probably not quite right to say that £8 billion would be wasted. There are some contracts that will have to be honoured. Some of that money has already been spent, for instance, on the many, many consultants that have looked at this over the years. But for instance, quite a proportion of that will be the purchase of land and buildings under compulsory purchase orders along the lines. And of course, there's going to be some value, even if you can't recoup the whole value in selling that off.
If someone, maybe you don't have an answer to this, maybe we will feel our way to an answer, but if someone has had their property or their land compulsorily purchased because of this and HS2 does not go ahead, what happens? Can they have that decision reversed?
Yeah, I don't know. But clearly that's at least an area in which the government can recoup some of the money. So It might not be the entirety of the figure that's being bandied around today, which, to be honest, I don't know whether it's accurate or not, because it's very hard to get to the heart of that data. We couldn't do that when we were writing our report last year.
Sure.
So I wouldn't necessarily rely on that figure. But the point is, a lot of money has been spent on this. And of course, there should be accountability for that, because the counterfactual, as we say in economics, which simply means the other things you could spend this money on, it's not just the railways, it's other public services, it's the chronic lack of housing, particularly social and affordable housing in this country, and even things like bus services, which we need a lot more of. And so the reason why the New Economics Foundation, it won't surprise you to learn, is very strongly in favour of the government investing more money in infrastructure. Mm-hmm. But the reason why we're really sceptical about spending $100 billion on a high-speed rail line, which will largely be travelled on by relatively wealthy people, is because you have to prioritise and you have to get value for money when you're spending public money. And if you don't, then you leave yourself wide open to people who say the government should never get involved in this sort of thing. So yes, there should be accountability for that money.